Welcome to Live a Supercharged Life, the podcast that ignites your energy and uplifts your spirit. This is your go-to space for navigating love, relationships, and personal growth. Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're going deep on something that can seriously make or break any relationship, whether it's with a partner or a friend, even family. We're talking about boundaries.
Boundaries.
Yeah, those kind of invisible lines we all have, right?
Yeah.
The ones we draw to protect ourselves and, our well-being.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got a whole bunch of really interesting sources here that get into like all the nitty-gritty details of what healthy boundaries should look like. And I gotta say, some of the stats are pretty surprising, to say the least. Like, did you know that 70% of the time, we're probably going to run into some resistance when we try to set healthy boundaries?
Really?
Especially, get this, from children.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Even from a young age, we're already navigating all these power dynamics and figuring out where our limits are.
It's fascinating. So in this deep dive, we're going to unpack what healthy boundaries actually are, why they're so important, and how to actually set them effectively in different areas of our lives.
Yeah.
From romantic relationships to friendships to even our digital world. I think this could be a game changer for a lot of our listeners.
For sure. The source material we've got here really stresses how connective healthy boundaries are to mental well-being.
Oh, interesting.
It actually says that strong boundaries can help prevent those feelings of resentment or disappointment, even violation.
Okay.
That can kind of creep into relationships when we're not clear about what we need.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit.
Yeah.
The source defines boundaries as, and I love this, the rules for how we want to be treated, which I think is so straightforward.
Yeah.
But how do we set those rules right?
Right.
Without, I think what people struggle with is coming across as controlling or rigid.
Yeah, that's such a good question, and the source actually tackles that head on.
Okay, good.
It's not about giving people a list of demands. It's about clearly and respectfully communicating our needs and our limits.
So give me an example.
Okay, well, let's think about personal space. Some people are huggers, some aren't.
Right.
A healthy boundary around physical touch could sound like, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not a big hugger. A handshake's fine.
Okay, so being upfront, honest about what feels comfortable for you.
Exactly.
And not forcing yourself into situations that make you feel uneasy.
Yeah, and just imagine, not having those clear boundaries and how that could lead to resentment over time.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
If you think about it, that makes total sense.
Right, imagine feeling pressured to hug someone when you really don't want to.
Yeah.
Over time, that could easily lead to avoiding that person altogether.
Yeah.
Or feeling resentful every time you see them.
It's like those little things that can actually have a big impact. Okay, so physical boundaries, check.
Check.
What other types of boundaries does the source talk about?
Well, it goes beyond just the physical. We also have, emotional boundaries. Okay, these are all about protecting our feelings and not taking on other people's emotional burdens as our own.
So what does that look like in a real situation?
Okay, so picture this. A friend's going through a tough breakup and just constantly wants to vent to you.
Right.
And while it's totally natural to want to be there for them, you also need to recognize your own limits.
Right, yeah.
If you're finding their emotional outpouring is too much or it's overwhelming, a healthy boundary could involve saying something like, I care about you and I want to support you, but I also need some space to process my own emotions right now. Can we talk about this tomorrow?
Okay, so being supportive without completely sacrificing your own well-being.
Exactly.
It's about finding that balance.
And sometimes, honestly, setting those emotional boundaries can even strengthen the relationship.
How so?
Because it shows that you respect yourself enough to communicate your needs, and it invites the other person to do the same.
I like that. Okay, so we've got physical and emotional boundaries. What else?
Time boundaries are crucial.
Time boundaries.
Especially in today's world. Think about it. We're constantly bombarded with demands on our time. From work deadlines to social commitments, it's so easy to feel overstretched and burnt out.
Oh, tell me about it.
Right.
What does the source say about setting those boundaries?
It's all about being intentional with your time and energy.
Okay.
This could mean things like setting specific work hours, limiting social media scrolling, or even just saying no to commitments when you're already feeling overbooked.
Yeah, that saying no part is always a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Especially when it's things I want to do.
Yeah.
But I guess if you're constantly saying yes to everything,
Right.
You end up with no time for yourself or for the things that truly matter.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing. The source highlights a quote from Stephen Covey.
Oh, I love him.
That I love. He says, "The key is not to prioritize what's on your schedule, but to schedule your priorities."
Oh, that's good.
It's so powerful, reminding us that we have the power to design our lives in a way that matches our values.
I love that. Scheduling my priorities, that's going on my inspiration board.
I love it.
Okay, so we've got physical, emotional, and time boundaries. Anything else?
Yes, the source also talks about material and financial boundaries.
Okay.
These can be tricky,
Right.
especially in close relationships where lending and borrowing are common.
Oh, yeah. Money can definitely be a source of tension.
Absolutely.
What's the source's advice on navigating that?
It really boils down to just open and honest communication.
Okay.
Being upfront about your financial comfort levels and limits can prevent a lot of misunderstandings and resentment down the road.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, let's say a friend asks to borrow a significant amount of money.
Right.
It's okay to say, "I'm not comfortable lending that much right now, but I'm happy to help you brainstorm other options."
I like that. Offering support
Exactly.
without overextending yourself.
And remember, setting these boundaries isn't about being stingy or uncaring. It's about protecting your own financial well-being.
Yeah.
It's like putting on your own oxygen mask first before assisting others.
That's a great analogy. Okay, so we've got physical, emotional, time, and material boundaries. Anything else we need to cover?
One last area the source dives into is intellectual and digital boundaries, which are so relevant today.
Oh yeah, in our hyper-connected world with social media and technology.
It's so easy to feel like we're always on.
Yeah, always on, yeah.
Yeah.
What does the source say about setting healthy boundaries in that realm?
It stresses respecting different viewpoints,
Okay.
engaging in online conversations with civility, even when we disagree.
Which is really hard these days.
Right.
With so much going on. But I see your point. Just because it's the internet doesn't mean common courtesy goes out the window.
Exactly. And it's also about setting boundaries around screen time and online privacy.
Right?
It's okay to turn off notifications, limit social media, and create dedicated offline time for yourself and your loved ones.
Speaking of offline time, the source actually shares a personal story about the author turning off their phone from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m.
Wow.
and deleting Instagram during work hours.
That's walking the walk.
I know, right? It shows that even small changes can make a big difference in reclaiming our time and attention. I have to admit, I'm feeling inspired to maybe do a little digital detox myself.
Yeah?
But even with all this great information, actually putting these boundaries into practice can feel pretty daunting. So what tips does the source offer for actually making it happen?
Well, that's exactly what we'll be diving into next. The source has some really helpful advice on things like assertiveness techniques,
Okay.
dealing with boundary violations, and the importance of being consistent.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, listeners. We'll be right back with more practical insights on how to build healthier relationships with boundaries.
After the break. So before the break, we were talking about how to actually put these boundaries into practice.
Right, which can be a whole different ballgame than just understanding the idea, right?
Totally.
So let's get into like the actual how-to. What does the source say about actually setting and enforcing these boundaries?
Well, one of the key things it emphasizes is assertiveness.
Okay.
But it makes a really important distinction. It's not about being aggressive or demanding.
Right.
It's about clearly and confidently communicating your needs and expectations, but in a respectful way.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Right.
Because I think a lot of people, myself included, struggle with finding that balance between being assertive but not coming across as, a jerk.
Totally. That's where I statements come in.
Okay.
The source really highlights how powerful they can be.
Interesting.
You can communicate your feelings and needs without blaming or accusing the other person.
Can you give me an example of how that would sound?
Yeah, for sure. Let's say your partner has this habit of checking their phone constantly during dinner, which makes you feel ignored.
Right.
Instead of saying, "You're always on your phone, you never pay attention to me,"
Right, which is accusatory.
which is super accusatory, yeah.
Yeah.
You could try saying something like, "I feel hurt and unimportant when you're on your phone during dinner. I'd really appreciate it if we could have some screen-free time together."
That's a huge difference, shifting the focus from blaming to actually expressing your feelings,
Right.
which is way more likely to be received well.
Exactly. And the source also points out how important it is to be direct and specific.
Okay.
When you set your boundaries, don't beat around the bush. Don't expect people to read your mind.
So it's like giving them a clear instruction manual
Yes.
for how you want to be treated.
Exactly, yeah.
No guesswork.
And sometimes you might need to, repeat your boundaries a few times.
Right.
Especially if someone has a habit of crossing them. It can take time for people to adjust.
That makes sense. It's like training a puppy. It takes patience and consistency.
Totally. But even with clear communication, chances are our boundaries are going to be tested at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe even violated.
For sure.
So it's important to be prepared for that and know how to respond.
So what happens when someone crosses a line, even after we've, clearly communicated our boundaries? What does the source say we should do?
Well, it stresses the importance of addressing the violation calmly and respectfully.
Okay.
It's easy to get triggered or defensive when someone crosses a line, but reacting with anger or aggression is just going to make things worse.
So take a breath, stay grounded, and try to approach it from understanding.
Exactly. The source recommends just restating your boundary,
Okay.
explaining why it's important to you. Remember, this isn't about punishing the other person, it's about reinforcing those limits for yourself.
Right. Protecting your own well-being.
Exactly.
And I imagine sometimes, especially if it keeps happening, we might need to set some stronger consequences.
You're right. The source acknowledges that in certain situations you might need to take further action, like limiting contact with the person or even ending the relationship if your boundaries continue to be disrespected.
That sounds really tough, but it makes the point that sometimes, to protect ourselves, we have to step back.
Yeah, it's about prioritizing your own mental and emotional health. And this brings us to another really crucial point.
Okay.
The source really emphasizes consistency.
So it's not enough to just state your boundaries once. You have to back them up with consistent action.
Exactly. It stresses the importance of following through. With any consequences you've set, gently reminding people of your boundaries when you need to.
Right.
It's about establishing a pattern of respect and accountability.
And it makes sense because if you're not consistent with our boundaries, it's like we're sending mixed messages.
Right.
And people are more likely to just keep crossing those lines.
Exactly. It's like having a speed limit on a road but never enforcing it.
Right.
People are going to learn they can get away with speeding.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So consistency is key. But I also appreciate how the source reminds us to approach boundary setting with, compassion
Yeah.
and understanding.
For sure.
Even when it's hard. It's not about being rigid or controlling. It's about creating healthy, lasting relationships.
Right. It's about finding that balance between honoring your own needs and respecting the needs of others.
Okay, so we've talked about assertiveness, dealing with boundary violations, and staying consistent. What are some key takeaways from this whole section on communicating and enforcing boundaries?
The source really drives home that clear communication is essential.
Okay.
Use I statements to express how you feel. Be direct and specific about your boundaries, and don't be afraid to repeat yourself.
And it's okay to feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Especially at first.
Totally normal.
It's a sign of growth, self-respect.
Absolutely. And don't forget about consistency. Enforce your boundaries calmly but firmly and follow through with consequences. Gently remind people of your limits when you need to.
So communication, consistency, compassion, those seem to be the big things here. What stood out to you as like the most important insight from this whole section on boundaries in action?
What's really interesting is how the source highlights this idea that setting boundaries is an ongoing process. It's not a one-time event.
Yeah.
As we change and our relationships evolve, so do our boundaries.
And that requires self-awareness.
Yeah, for sure.
We have to be tuned in to our own needs and feelings to know when our boundaries need adjusting.
Absolutely. It's about checking in with ourselves and being honest about what's working and what's not.
Okay, so we've covered a lot here. What final thoughts does the source offer as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into boundaries?
The source ends on a really powerful note,
Okay.
emphasizing that setting and maintaining healthy boundaries. It's a journey,
It's a journey, yeah.
not a destination. It's an ongoing process. Self-discovery, communication, growth.
And ultimately, it's about creating relationships that are both fulfilling and respectful,
Exactly.
where everyone feels seen, heard, valued.
Yeah. The source leaves us with this thought-provoking question.
Ooh, I love those.
Think about a relationship where you feel your boundaries are a bit fuzzy. What's one small step you can take today to start clarifying them?
I love that. It encourages us to take action,
Yeah.
even if it's just a small step.
Even if it's just a small step in the right direction. And for our listeners who want even more resources and support on this whole journey of building stronger relationships, you can visit livesuperchargedlife.com.
Yes, it's a great resource. It's packed with info and practical advice.
So much good stuff in there.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this episode, what resonated most with you from all this information about boundaries?
What really struck me is how the Source reframes boundaries.
Okay.
Not as walls to shut people out, but as a foundation for healthy and fulfilling connections.
I like that.
It's about creating safe spaces where everyone feels respected and empowered to be themselves. It's not about control, it's about connection.
And the Source's focus on the link between healthy boundaries and mental health, that's so important.
It is.
It highlights how much honoring our own needs and limits directly impacts our well-being.
It's like that oxygen mask analogy. You have to take care of yourself first before you can effectively help others.
That's a great way to put it. And the Source offers so many practical insights
It does.
into how to do that, from setting clear limits on our time and energy to communicating assertively.
Right. I especially love the part about digital boundaries.
Oh, me too.
Especially in today's world, it's easy to feel overwhelmed
Yeah.
by all the information and demands on our attention.
It's a good reminder that we have the power to shape our digital lives to support our well-being.
Absolutely. And the Source makes a great point that blurry or non-existent boundaries can actually lead to more stress and less happiness.
Interesting.
It's powerful. Setting those limits isn't selfish, it's self-care.
And self-care is essential
It is.
for showing up as our best selves in all of our relationships,
Totally.
whether it's with partners, friends, family, even colleagues.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing we deserve to be treated with respect, and that includes respecting our own needs and boundaries.
So as we wrap up, what's one final takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important message is that setting boundaries, it's a journey,
It's a journey.
not a destination. It's an ongoing process. Self-discovery, communication, and adjustment. And it's worth it.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
It's about creating those relationships built on mutual respect, understanding, and a healthy dose of self-love.
Exactly.
And remember, even small steps in the right direction can make a big difference.
For sure. So take a minute, think about your own boundaries. What feels good? What needs to be adjusted? What one small step can you take today to create healthier, more fulfilling relationships?
I love that challenge.
Yeah.
And don't forget, for more resources and support on building those supercharged relationships, visit livesuperchargedlife.com. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep creating those amazing connections. It's really hitting me how connected all these different types of boundaries are.
Yeah.
Like they all work together to create this sense of, I don't know, well-being and respect
Yeah.
in our relationships.
It's not just about setting boundaries in like one area of our lives. It's about making them part of all our interactions.
Right.
When we have those healthy boundaries, it's like a ripple effect. It impacts all our relationships.
And it's making me realize that setting boundaries isn't a one-size-fits-all thing either.
Totally.
What works for one person might not work for another, and that's okay.
Exactly. The source material even talks about how boundaries can and should change over time.
Right.
As our needs and circumstances change.
Makes sense.
It's not about rigid rules. It's about having this ongoing conversation with ourselves and the people we care about.
This reminds me of what you were saying earlier about how setting boundaries can actually make relationships stronger.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people worry that it'll push people away, but it sounds like the opposite can happen.
It really can. When we're clear about our needs and our limits, it lets others show up for us in a way that's genuine and respectful. It builds trust and safety.
Those are important.
Yeah, essential for any healthy relationship.
So it's not about building walls to keep people out. It's about creating healthy connections.
Exactly. Finding that sweet spot where everyone feels seen and heard and respected. It's a journey, not a destination.
This has been so insightful. I feel like I've learned so much about what boundaries are, why they matter, and how to actually start using them in my own life. Any last bits of advice you want to leave our listeners with?
If you're feeling lost or overwhelmed about where to start, just remember this. Start small.
Okay.
Pick one relationship where you feel like your boundaries are a bit fuzzy,
Yeah.
and then just pick one small step you can take today to make them clearer.
Okay, I like that.
It could be as simple as saying no to one extra thing, taking 15 minutes of screen-free time, having an honest conversation with a friend about something that's been bugging you. Every little bit counts.
I love that. Start small, be consistent, and remember, you deserve to have healthy, fulfilling relationships. So if you're looking for some amazing tips, some resources, some help with relationships, head over to liveasuperchargedlife.com. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.